Remember that chorus. We'll come back to that in a moment. John, a guy by the name of Roger Van Oak, he has a book entitled Kicking the Seat of the Pants. Now, if I didn't even like the book, I would have picked it up because I love the title. But it's a book that reminds us of something that we all know about, and that is, if I ask you right now to pick out everything blue and you looked around for it, what would happen? Well, you'd find it here and there and everywhere. And then how many times do you notice a car or you purchase a car, you'd never even seen that car, and now you see it all the time? It's called a kick in the seat of the pants because what happens is your perspective, your mindset sees things differently. And we could name how many ways in which we do that. It happens to us all the time. I would say that we are living in a time where you and I have difficulty more and more picking up the opportunity that is ours to have a God mindset. It's not as easy as it once was. So today we come to the end of Acts. We've been hanging around here for a while. We come to the end, and so you know what's going on here. Paul is kind of on trial for his life, and so nobody wants to be the person who pulls the string and says, yeah, let's just kill him. And so they're sending him here and there and everywhere. And the problem is, he's a Jew in his background. Matter of fact, he's a Pharisee of Pharisees, and so you can't just kill one of these guys. They've got a legacy. They've got a resume. And so here we find a kind of the rubber meets the road moment, and Paul is brought, after fiddling around with Festus, he's brought over to King Agrippa. And they have absolutely nothing in common. And so if you got your outline, you want to follow along, we're going to show just how the ways in which their life differs. First of all, if we compare King Agrippa and Paul, their worlds were incredibly different. Let me look into there a little closer. Agrippa was a Hellenized Jew. In other words, he wasn't a thoroughbred. He wasn't pure. Last of the Herods who lived at the end of an era. You remember the Herods when Jesus was born. He personified an age that was dying. His age was passing by. He lived in a world that looked like the fire had gone all around it, and the flame of the embers was still burning, and there wasn't much left but the smoldering. But now Paul, he had been born into a new world. He had lived out his old world, but he had been born into a new world, and his world was intensely alive. His world had been recreated by the intrusion of the Spirit of Christ. And so it was a world in which men were looking forward to something that would be revealed and not backward into something that had already been shown. And so for people who live in a world gone by with forgotten dreams and lost traditions, the resurrection of Christ will always be a threat. It'll always be a threat. Why? Because it turns your world upside down. And the fearful thing is, the more we get used to this Jesus thing, if we're not careful, we can compartmentalize it. We can kind of domesticate it. We can kind of put it in a box or put it in a mindset that, well, it just kind of is tamed and doesn't bother us anymore. It doesn't reach out and grab us. Let me give you a story of a monk where it reached out and grabbed him. It's told by a writer, Nikos Kazantzakis. He's a Greek writer, and he tells about a monk who had saved for like 40 years of his life because he wanted to go to the sepulcher of Jesus, the place where it is believed that he was placed when he died. So he'd saved up all these years. He began his journey to go and see that. And on the way there, he crossed paths with a man who had a conversation that went like this. Good morning, Father. Where are you going? And the monk says, I am going to the Holy Sepulchre, where Christ was buried, and I'm going to march around the sepulchre 3 times and then pray. And the man said, well, the trip must be costing you a lot of money. Why don't you pray, walk around me 3 times and pray for my family so that we might even be able to have food and housing with that money. And the monk decided that he would do exactly that. And the moral of the story, as told in the book, was the monk never saw where Christ was buried, but he saw where Christ was alive and well. Now, you and I, we live up in the Protestant denomination of the world where we've lived with the Protestant ethic, and that whole thing bothers us. It bothers me because this man had saved his money and he ought to have the right to it. But that's not the point. The point is we have to have a mindset every day that re-engages the possibility that God can take even our perfect little lives and reshape them into something different. The comparison between Agrippa and Paul showed that they had different worlds, but secondly, it showed that they had different passions. Agrippa did not have any kind of drive, or he didn't really believe much of what Jesus said. Matter of fact, I doubt that King Agrippa even believed that he had been alive or dead. It didn't bother him. It didn't influence him. But here Paul was a man that based his whole life not only on Christ, but on the fact that he believed there was a resurrection. Agrippa knew his world was going. Paul knew that his world was breaking free. Our Jensen recently had I told you about her having a Nona camp week, where they did all kinds of things. And one of the things that they did, I almost put the picture up on the board, but it makes me cry, so I didn't want to put it on the board. But there's a picture we have of Jensen during that week where she rode a horse for the first time. And not just like, the pony small ones. We're talking big horse that Dan would not get on probably. And so big horse, big horse. And so little Jensen gets on this, and there is that moment, once you've decided you're going to do this big thing and you're excited about it, the more you wait, the less excited you become. And the more you feel the size of that horse, and you recognize that if that horse were to roll over on you, there would be a whole new thing called pancake human being. This would not be good. This was big horse. And there's that moment where Neva gets her picture, and there is this look of absolute dread and fear across her face before that horse took off. All went well. She survived it. She came back. But it made me think, there's a equestrian little track out, and it talks about this whole idea of, when the horses jump over these fences and things, the riders, and how they train for this kind of thing. And one of the phrases they said in this caught my attention. It says, take your heart and throw it over the fence and then jump over after it. And there's a bit of truth to that, isn't it? Think about anything you've ever had to face, and there's always been that moment, do I really want to do this? And here Paul was standing in front of King Agrippa. He knew all the stakes. He could lose his life. But he kept throwing his heart ahead, saying, no, it is Jesus that I believe in, and it is Jesus that I will give my life to. Their world was different. Their passion was different. Thirdly, their knowledge of God was different. For King Agrippa, God was simply one of those properties that was brought out. They didn't have God with a capital G. They had gods with a small g. And so they would often bring out on those celebratory occasions the different, statues and things of their gods. And they were properties to be brought out and to be talked about, but there were not a relationship to be had. And so when Paul began, and you see the whole thing in chapter 23 about verse 26, 3 on, Paul is saying that God was the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that he made the sea and the sun and the grass and the trees, and that everything that drew breath came from God, and that he created man in his image, and that there was in fact a maker and a master of history. Now, make note of how unusual that would have sounded to King Agrippa. A number of years ago, J.B. Phillips wrote a little book, and it was a little book, but it was a profound message. Your God is too small. And for years, I've worked on myself as well as talking with others that we kind of shrink as we get older in terms of our belief system and our sense that God is going to do something new and fresh in us and through us. And I hope I never reach the point where I don't continue to believe that God can do, even in the basic stuff of my life, something more than I planned. I will reference a wedding I did last night in just a few moments, because it was one of those, I had very small idea about this wedding last night, and God kind of came and surprised me. It was a knowledge of God, but also there was a difference between their knowledge of Christ. Agrippa, he had heard about Christ, and his uncle Herod, you'll remember, was the one who tried Jesus on Good Friday. So he knew about him, but it was only out of a sense of curiosity. Agrippa had heard stories about the resurrection of Jesus, but most of them ended in fear, or some of them even ended in people not saying anything. So he didn't have anything for certain that he knew about that resurrection. But Paul didn't know Jesus in the flesh. He had no theoretical speculation about who Jesus was, because ultimately he knew, because of his encounter with Christ, that Jesus was alive. He didn't know him casually as a friend on the street. He didn't know him as simply an idea in his head. He knew him catastrophically, dramatically, dynamically, in an overpowering moment when God became real, and there is this moment of truth and love. Agrippa had everything and possessed nothing. Paul had nothing and yet possessed everything. One was a king, and the other one was a prisoner. One was a judge, and the other one was a condemned man. Yet one lost soul, draped with the trappings of a king. The other one was a hero and a saint, bound in these chains of a prisoner. Now, what was really the difference? And that's where we'll spend the rest of our time. What was the difference? Paul had a God mindset that had ultimate eyes. Ultimate eyes. Look at those scriptures I list for you there. 18 and 19, Acts 26. You will help them and understand and turn them from darkness to light and from Satan's control to God, so that their sins will be forgiven and they will receive a share among those who are sanctified by faith in me. And so, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. In other words, he's telling him his whole story. He's saying, this is what Christ has done to my life. This is what God, through Christ, can do in your life. And I tell you that I have remained faithful to that vision that God gave me in my life. How many of you grew up with Smokey the Bear? Well, all of you, because he's 75 years old this week. Did you know that? We had a birthday party at our house. No, we didn't really. But I grew up with Smokey the Bear. Very real Smokey the Bear. My brother Buddy and I had teddy bears. Now, we were pretty manly men. We didn't take those teddy bears outside much because we were manly men. But we both had one, and his name of his teddy bear was Junior, and mine was Smokey the Bear. I was very proud of Smokey the Bear. I carried him around all over, not outside, but I carried him around all over. And it made me think again of Ian Pitt Watson's daughter, Rosemary, who had a little rag doll. I went back and reread the story. Ian Pitt Watson, great tradition. They're in the tradition of Scottish Presbyterian ministers. His dad was, I think his granddad was, and so he died about, about 2015, I believe it was. But he tells the story about Rosemary. They had traveled a long way. They had been coming from, anytime you go to Australia, you go a long way. They had gone from Britain to Australia, and so they knew that they were going to have a layover, and so in the Melbourne airport, there was a very, very bright lady, and that is that she knew that little girl. At the time, Rosemary was 3 years old, and so she brought that rag doll to give to her. She had made it from, rags, from cloth, and put it all together, and Rosemary didn't even say thank you. She was so exhausted. If you've seen children when they should have been to bed 10 hours ago, you know that they're just weary to the soul. And so she grabbed that rag doll and stuck it to her face, and her tears just kind of went into the rag doll. The funny thing about that, Ian Pitt Watson used to tell the story. He said, more and more, there was less and less of that doll and more of the desire for her to hold that. And so through all those years, she kept that little rag doll. You know it. Linus had his blanket. Radar and MASH had his teddy bear. The Velveteen Rabbit is a rag doll. And you know, I have my Smokey the Bear. It's not surprising that a rag doll would become a very, very precious thing to her. It came to mean something to her at a very unique and valuable time. Now, the sensible thing was to wash that thing, and if you did, it would ultimately dissipate eventually because it was just old. Or you just kept that old rag doll laying around, and that's what they did. Ian Pitt Watson used to tell that story, and then he would pause, and with that great British voice that he had, he would say, what you needed to know was that if you loved Rosemary, you loved that rag doll. And then he would say something very profound. I've lived with it for years. Some things are loved because they are valuable. I love my house. I love my car. You love those things because they are valuable. But some things are valuable because they are loved. When Paul looked into Agrippa's eyes and spoke to him about a relationship where God loved in such a way that he became valuable, important, he became significant. That's what we talk about when we say ultimate eyes. Ultimate eyes. But there's also this intimate ears. Verse 25 of Acts chapter 26, but Paul said, I'm not out of my mind, you excellency Festus, I'm reporting what is absolutely true. The truth will always get you. It will always get you because the truth is the truth, and it just, typically, my experience has been the truth hurts usually when it's supposed to. And so, what would be good for all of us is not only to be able to see the ultimate things that matter, but to be able to hear the things that also matter. So if you're looking at those verses there together, make note of the fact that Paul is not perfect. Make note of that. He had a temper. He was impatient. If you read between the lines, he had some pride and vanity issues, and he stumbled on more than one occasion. But the fact is, he knew that he was loved by God and that made him incredibly valuable. He had a vision that he kept and would not let go. It's that time of year when people are doing these swimming feats and different things. I saw a guy the other day trying to, go over the English Channel or somewhere in one of those little, you fly in the air with air underneath you and kind of things, and he didn't quite make it. I understand that he later tried it and got there. But it made me think of a lady by the name of Florence Chadwick. If you know anything about her, she was an Olympic swimmer who wanted to swim, the record places. And she was swimming one day, the Catalina Channel. She'd already swam the English Channel. And so this was going to be a great opportunity for her. And, she had three obstacles going against her back then. She had this incredibly numbing cold water. It chills me even thinking about it. And she had sharks along the way. So many sharks that were around her that they literally had to have part of her team with guns shooting them away. But the thing that really ended up keeping her from getting her record was the fact that the fog set in, and even after she had swam all these hours, I think she swam 16-something hours. Yep, 15 hours and 55 minutes. She finally gave up. Later saw that she was within a half mile of making her record. Now, not only did she go back and make that record later, but she beat the men's record for doing that swim. Now, why do I say that? I say that because how much of life depends on what you can see. When you can see God working, when you can believe that God's working, know that He's working, you can put up with almost anything. But when you can't, boy, it gets tough, doesn't it? So let me end with a couple stories. This is a story, I have no record that I've ever told it here, but I've told this probably 15 times because it was told to me 20 years ago probably, but it didn't show on anywhere. But if you hear it once, you'll never forget it. It's a true story about a Methodist minister. It's the Albert Young family was the name of the family. They had gathered for the yearly revival, and so it was a preacher inviting the revivalist, evangelist guy to come into their house, and the wife had always prepared really, really well for them. And so, it was just, decked out. Had the tablecloth, and it had fried chicken, and, the relishes, and the best silverware. This was a place to be. But what you need to know is that this young family, had 4 children. 4. And think of the silver, think of the nice things going on here. The ages then were 4, 8, 12, and 16. Very programmed people. Paula Jean was the 8-year-old, and the 4-year-old brother. There were 3 of the other brothers. Paula Jean is, they'd gotten everything ready. They had waited and waited and waited. They were really ready to eat, and so they sat down at the table, ready to go, and then they asked the evangelist to pray. And he prayed, and he prayed, and he prayed. So when he finally said amen, she reaches for the sugar, and sure enough, the 4-year-old hits her arm, and she knocks over her tea. 7 floating ice cubes and tea all over the table. Well, the husband, everybody's embarrassed, but he wants to help her. So the husband looks at his wife and reaches over and knocks over his glass. Now, by then, the whole dynamic has changed. The whole dynamic of the dinner has changed. Those 2 boys had never seen their dad knock over his tea on purpose and wink at his mother. So what do you think they did? Boom, boom. They both hit their glasses, and off 37 ice cubes and tea all over the table. True story. The guest minister is just backing up. Because tea, when it gets loose on a table, is aggressive, and it will move at you. But he finally caught the wind of the moment, and he leans back in and knocks his glass over. The wife is the only one left. And she is beyond words. She looks up, and her husband, with the pleading eyes, and then she says, boom, and knocks hers over. Everybody's laughing but Paula Jean. And they look over at Paula Jean, and she's weeping. She's weeping because she just saw her dad do something incredibly stupid, and everybody else follow. And man, when he told that story, that has gospel all over it. Remember the words we read a moment ago? Broken and spilled out. You see, when Christ came, he says, your mess is my mess. And whatever tea you've spilled, count me in. Because I want to be in. Think of that the next time you spill your tea. One more story before we leave. This ultimate eyes and intimate ears. 2 experiences over the last few weeks has touched me in a deeper way. We went to a wedding. I told many of you about. A good friend of mine was a producer in Nashville. Went 3 or 4 weeks ago. I did not know it, but he had produced all of Randy Travis's songs. I didn't know that at the time. But Randy Travis was at all the events. And so if you know anything about Randy, you know that he's in a wheelchair now. He's had a massive stroke. He does not really talk. He can say a few words, but I watched. Here was a guy who, you couldn't be more famous. But every part of the event, he stayed for from beginning to end and wanted to be a part of that experience because he loved Kyle so much. Couldn't say much, but when the songs were on, when people were saying things that were meaningful, he would, Yes. And he was there. Last night I was doing a wedding in here, and it was one of those weddings where they have so much potential. This young couple, but they're unchurched, but they know the Lord. They know about the Lord. They have language that implies they know him, and we talked about that. Obviously, I've invited them to our church. I was sitting in the front here with the groom, who was one of those guys that you look at him and you say, this guy's too cool for school. He's a great-looking kid. He's got long hair like my son has right now. He had glasses sitting on top of his head, just too cool for school. But he's really a good kid. And he looked over at me and he said, I'm nervous. Would you pray for me? Well, I did. But about the time we began to pray, there was a noise that came from the back. Ugh! And I thought, uh-oh. So, didn't think much about it. 30 seconds later, from the back. He leans over and he says, don't pay any attention, Dan. Everybody here knows exactly who that is and why she's doing that. I said, what is it? He said, that's my aunt. I think he said Iris, Aunt Iris. He said, when I was a little boy, 3 years old, I was drowning and she saved me. And she suffered a brain bleed in saving me. And that's what she does all the time. I'm just telling you, I was done for the night. Now, how many more times do you think that little lady in the back yelled? Every time I did something that meant something, she was yelling. When they went up that aisle, I thought she was going to pass out. When they came out here, I got her a seat to sit in the hallway. And when they came through there, she was shouting. Why? Because she had ultimate eyes, intimate ears, and she knew something good was happening. I want to be able to see when others can't see. I want to be able to hear when others can't hear. And I want to be able to love rag dolls. Not because they're valuable in and of themselves, but because they're loved, they are valuable. Let's pray together. Father, during these moments, we want to say that we are honored to be loved by you. We are absolutely honored to be loved by you. That is something we take too much for granted. And so today we stand up and want to be counted that we are loved and valuable. Now let us do something with it. Let us so live our lives into the future. Let us so live those that are around us. Let us put aside anything that's encumbering us. Let us put aside any weight that is holding us back, and let us groan with utter ecstasy about the fact that we are loved and that we want to love others. Stir us, Father, deeply this day. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen. We're going to sing a song all of us know. It's a song that will challenge us. It is well with my soul. Let's stand together, and if you have a need in your life, if you want to accept Christ, if you want to rededicate your life, if you want to be a part of our church, whatever it might be, you come as we stand and sing.